Hello everybody, this is Refresh, and I am here to talk about the Lost Caverns of Ixalan pre-release that I attended. As you can see, this is the pre-release pack, and I have ripped it open, and it says you've only scratched the surface. It's got a bit of an exploration theme, which is not unlike Zendikar, but it has a stronger Mesoamerican feel. On the pre-release pack, you get the usual items right now with some box art, some counters that you can punch out, some potential tokens that you can punch out, and inside you have your deck box with some pretty cool artwork on it. If you open it up, you get your usual spin down counter with a black and green motif is what I got here. Inside you'll get your guide to how to build a pre-release deck, and then on the other side you have some art which looks like it's kind of a scale of people versus the various dinosaurs of Ixalan. Not very appropriate to the Lost Caverns per se, but you know, I guess it's nice to have a little bit of art like that. You also get a random rare as your promo card. In this case I got the Roaming Throne, which proved to be pretty cool. You also get a code for Arena to redeem 6 packs. I've already redeemed this, so I wouldn't bother trying to input this yourself. But you get that for your pre-release pack, as well as a card that includes several tokens that you can use that are pertinent to the set, including Stun, Finality, and +1/+1. And then a deck divider using the Planeswalker-ish mask art that you see in the set. And then you also get 6 packs of Magic the Gathering. Thematically, this has to do with some Planeswalkers and other characters on Ixalan diving deep into the caverns of Ixalan and encountering a whole bunch of unexpected beings and even worlds that you find down there. And if you read the stories on the Magic website, then you can learn a little bit more about what is actually going on there, including a fungal invasion that reminds me of The Last of Us, I guess. And then there's also multiple of these forces trying to race to the center of the Earth now to try to find what is hidden beneath there, including vampires searching for their lost god, and merfolk trying to figure out what's going on behind the door, and then the Sun Empire trying to figure out what's behind the door because there might be something of use there in terms of a weapon to fight the vampires. And then the pirates are also trying to figure things out, and eventually they find a hidden world down there, which is something unexpected with a lot more crazy stuff going on. It was kind of cool, you know. It was a bit short. I wish there was a little bit more substance to it, but it was fine. Overall, you know, the pre-release experience itself is kind of the same as everything that you've expected before. There's no bonus this time. There's no extra card or anything like that. You just get a pre-release pack with 6 packs and then these small handful of extras, and that's it. There's nothing that makes you feel like you're descending into the Lost Caverns, except, you know, opening these packs here and playing with the cards, and that is that. So here is everything that I opened. I think the biggest things to note were the Roaming Throne, which I got as my promo card, a treasure map, which I got as a foil card, and then the biggest bomb I think was Ogier Pakpatik, Deepest Epoch, which is a 4/3 flying god that if it dies, it comes back in 3 turns and plays as a land in the meantime. And it's a pretty strong card, and it made me want to play blue, especially when you added Malcolm Alluring Scoundrel, which was a pretty powerful potential value engine, as well as a 2/1 flyer that can come out of nowhere. And then on top of that, it had 2 Waterwind Scouts. Now blue didn't have a ton of cards. It was the second lowest in terms of the total number of cards, but I think that that made it strong enough that I wanted to absolutely play it. And so from there, it was just trying to choose what to match with blue. Green was immediately out because it just had such a limited card pool, and so I just threw green out immediately, and that also took out Akawali as well, and that left me with the other 3 colors to look at. I was looking at white because it had such a large number of cards and a good number of creatures, but there wasn't a whole lot that white had that was going well with what blue had, and so I ruled that out and kind of just left us looking at black and red. Now black was really interesting because it had a good number of cards, a decent number of creatures, and most notably a lot of removal. So I could really pull together a black and blue control deck. And then we also have Whale of the Forgotten contributing to that as well. And then if I needed some bodies, I also had the Hoverstone Pilgrims in the artifacts as well if I needed. And so that was one consideration. And then I also considered blue and red as the other consideration. And that's primarily because there was a lot of potential synergy between what blue and red are doing, especially in terms of treasures and looting or rummaging to get a little bit of advantage. And so it was that, and then that would enable Captain Storm to join the battle, as well as all the treasures would let me splash the best of whatever else I wanted to get. And so considering the splash, there weren't a lot of cards to actually splash. There was Abuelo, Ancestral Echo, and then Whale of the Forgotten if I was to play blue and red. And just looking at everything, I had a lot more in terms of consistency in creature types with blue and red, and that would make the Roaming Throne better. And then I also had a treasure map, which also worked well with the treasure production capable between these two colors. And so that's why I ultimately ended up deciding to go blue and red, and then, you know, maybe splashing one of the other cards here. And then I also have some Hidden Cataracts and a Captivating Cave, as well as a handful of other caves. But there's not a whole lot of cave payoffs here in this pool. So let's take a look at the deck that I built. So this is the deck that I built, along with 6 islands and 8 mountains, which you don't see here. And as you can see, the curve tends a lot more towards the lower end, so it's a bit more of an aggressive deck. But I have some things at the top, and those things I can pitch for lands if I need them. But I expected to often just need them as some sort of top end threat. But the really cool thing about this deck is the amount of synergy that exists within it. The Abuelo Ancestral Echo exists even without a single plains because the capacity of this deck to make treasures is really high. Both Malcolm and Inti create a loop of discards which will trigger the Enterprising Scallywags to create treasures. The treasure map can also create treasures, and the Plundering Pirates create treasures as they enter the battlefield. And so just those alone, I expected to be enough to get Abuelo going, but I can also discover Abuelo off the Hidden Cataracts, for example. And so I think that that's enough. The interesting thing about the deck is if I can create enough treasures, then the Sunshot Militia becomes a shooting machine because I can just tap the treasures, which aren't doing a whole lot, for damage over time. And that actually works out well. Now it's sorcery speed, so I have to be careful about what I'm tapping, but that's interesting. And in the case of a even board state where we're just kind of staring at each other, that means I'm doing damage. That's the other reason why I put the Panicked Allosaur in here, because it's a way to do additional damage without having to attack, and that's always nice. The deck also included Abuelo because the ability to blink some of these cards, like the Plundering Pirates and the Waterwind Scouts, as well as the Didactic Echo, is an ability to actually get additional value out of those cards as well. I don't have a ton of removal in this deck, and it's not very strong. We have the Triumphant Chop and the Sunfire Torch. The Sunfire Torch also triggers Descend, which will help with the Enterprising Scallywags, and so does Charge of Course, which I put in for that reason. And Eaten by Piranhas is just my general purpose removal, not a great one. And then we have Out of Air as my one way of dealing with big threats as they are cast later. And so I keep it as a counterspell to defend my deck. And that's basically the deck. There's a bit of flying potential for damage here between Malcolm, Abuelo, the 2 Waterwind Scouts, Ojibwatek. And then the Roaming Throne is an interesting also additional pick because it can actually cause double triggers of many of the abilities here. So for example, if I choose Pirates, then it will double trigger the Plundering Pirates, the Enterprise Scallywags, as well as Captain Storm and Malcolm, which creates a whole lot of potential additional triggers. The Roaming Throne can also double trigger the Waterwind Scouts, as well as the Didactic Echo if I call out Spirits. And then there's just a tiny bit of additional possible value with Ojibwatek Patik rebounding Chart a Course and Triumphant Chomp. The Outer Air is one that we don't want to rebound. And I think that made this a little bit better deck than the black and blue deck that I was also really strongly considering. With that out of the way, let's take a look at how the games played. Alright, let's talk about the games that we played. So the very first match was up against a white-red player, and they rolled better than me, so they got to go first. And then the first game was pretty even for a bit, up until the point that my opponent started drawing more cards that mattered, and I started drawing more lands, and that eventually took over the game for my opponent, and they won. The second game saw me assemble a bit of a treasure building combo with Inti and Malcolm. and that kind of took over the game, especially once I had a scallywag generating treasures and at one point Captain Lannery Storm growing my team. My opponent wasn't able to keep up with that, especially once they started drawing a little bit more lands than they had hoped for, and so I got through and won in the second game. The final game, my opponent was on the play again, and it was basically a repeat of the first. My opponent and I were fairly even for a bit until my opponent pulled ahead in terms of being able to draw cards that actually affected the board, and I drew more lands, and then the winner was my opponent in that case. So late game flood determined who was going to win. We were close to top decking at the end there. And then we moved on to the second match, going in 0-1. This was against a player that was playing white and black with a splash of blue. And the first match was a extremely long match. In fact, it took up, I want to say, almost half an hour, maybe even more than half an hour. And we basically kept attacking each other for a bit, and then I pulled ahead in the end because my opponent flooded, even though I took a mulligan to 6 to start, and they just started drawing lands, even though they only had a 15 land deck, and I drew spells, and eventually the fact that I had more plays, more effects on the board, especially once I was able to get Malcolm going and looting, got me there in the end for the win. In the second game, I took a mulligan to 6 again, this time off of a 6-lander with a land cycler, and we got off to the races. This one went all the way 2 turns, with my opponent having a strong lead, but not enough to finish me off, and ultimately we got into turns, and then my opponent was able to finally finish me off on turn 5 using the Thousand Moon Smithy, which is a really powerful card to generate a lot of board advantage, and that kind of took me out. I couldn't handle the gigantic, large mess of creatures and was forced to chump, and I thought that I could get there through turn 5, but it wasn't enough, and I lost that game. I won, the second game I lost, and so I was 0-1-1, and then I went into my third match, and that was against a player that was running a blue and black deck. I was on the play, and my opponent had to take a mulligan, and in the first match I just had a stronger value engine, and my opponent was a little slow to start. They didn't even have any colored mana until they eventually started drawing their islands, and so by the time that they were able to start playing cards, I'd already done a pile of damage in the air of all places, and they really didn't have a lot to do, especially because I was pecking with a pumped up Malcolm and a god that was also pumped up, and so no blockers, no way around that, and that was the end of that. In the second game, my opponent let me be on the play again, but they had a lot more removal for the cards, including my god. They were able to exile the god, and eventually they were able to outclass me with a Souls of the Lost, which turned into a gigantic creature because of the number of cards that they had in the graveyard, and that eventually forced me to chomp my way out, and I wasn't able to keep the chumps going, and so my opponent won that one. And then we finally went into the third game, and I was again on the play because I chose to be, and this time I had a gigantic amount of value as before using the Inti and Malcolm combo, which I drew Malcolm on the majority of my opening hands in this particular format, and so I got a lot of use out of him and found him to be quite impressive as long as I can connect with him. And so that kind of value was just a little bit too much for my opponent to handle, and so I just got there really fast before my opponent could really assemble much of a force, and by the time that they were able to, I was just too big and too tall and flying over their creatures for them to do anything about it. And so I won that, and then I ended up going 1-1-1, so 1 win, 1 loss, and 1 draw. And that was it for my games. I generally found that the set is a lot of fun. Now that's because I was able to assemble a bit of a treasure combo synergy theme, and yeah, I could have played the control deck, and I think it might have possibly been stronger, but this was a lot more fun, like playing with the treasures, and it gave me a lot of hope for how the draft format would be, because I think that the themes can be a lot more strongly tailored when you are choosing the cards as opposed to just trying to make the best of what you get out of 6 packs. And so for my wins, Emerald Knights gave me 1 promo card. I could choose between Beast Whisperer and some blue card that untaps all of your permanents or artifacts or whatever it might be, as well as 2 set boosters for Lost Caverns of Ixalan. And my general experience is that this set is looking to be a lot of fun in draft. It was pretty good fun in sealed, but that's also just because my pool really worked with me in terms of being fun. And that is positive. The negatives are the standard negatives when it comes to experiencing pre-releases. There's not a lot besides the set itself really taking you into the theme of the set. And I wish that the experience was a little bit more like the past experiences where there was something else on top of it that helped you feel the theme of the set. So maybe if there was some sort of guide to exploring, and if you get all the way down to the bottom, that's what unlocks your promo card, I think that might have been more interesting. I do appreciate that there was a promo card thrown in that you get for just playing at Emerald Knights, so I really appreciated that, as well as guaranteed 2 packs, even though you can't get any more, but I don't mind that because it really takes the pressure off of winning, and so it just makes it about having fun and exploring the set. So I like that, but this is, like a lot of the pre-releases as of late, a very, very basic one that doesn't have any frills, and it doesn't really make it feel like it's necessarily worth doing unless you particularly like playing sealed deck or you just want to see all the new cards. And so aside from that, and for many people that's going to be enough to warrant a trip to the local gaming store to do a pre-release, but I feel that Wizards can really step up in terms of providing a little bit more for the local game store to do, and for them to provide to really help make you feel the theme of the given set. They just haven't been doing it. And you know, they even took away the extra card that they had provided in previous sets as well. And so it doesn't feel great as a pre-release experience, but the set is really strong and I'm expecting to have a really good time drafting it. And I hope I'm right. So that's going to be it for me in terms of my pre-release experience. Let me know how your pre-release experience went in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button. If you'd like to see more of my videos, you can hit subscribe. This was Refresh. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.